Before we get into things today, I want to remind you again that the Lingoda Language Marathon is about to go into its next round, and you can still sign up for it for the next 3 days. So that means the cutoff date is on the 14th, come Monday. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can click here to get more information on it, but basically the Language Marathon is a program by Language School Lingoda that makes it possible for you to take 3 months of immersion German classes completely for free if you fulfill the one requirement of showing up for class every single day. They have classes available for you 24/7. Just make sure you book as early as you can so you get the slot that is actually convenient for you. And it doesn't matter what stage of German you are currently at, no matter what your proficiency level is, there are classes that will fit that niveau, that level. So if you still want to go sign up for that, you can still do so. The link is in the description. Use this code to get a discount on your entry fee. Like I said, if you want more information, click here to get to that video. Thanks Lingoda for sponsoring the FE, and now let's get into the episode.
Hallo Leute, ich bin Anton und ich komme aus Kalifornien und ihr seht Deutsch für euch.
I conducted a poll yesterday on Twitter, my YouTube community tab, and Patreon to see which of 4 suggested topics you would like me to talk about in today's video. And overall, counting all the votes from Twitter and all the votes from YouTube and counting all the votes from Patreon double, what came out as the top priority out of those 4 was me talking about the preposition in and when to use it with a dative and when to use it with an accusative. So that's what we're doing today. I did, however, see that the people who commented on the posts, especially on Twitter, were very interested in gaming vocabulary, so I'll make a mental note of that. Now, in is a German preposition that can trip you up, and it will probably trip you up pretty early in your learning process. Because you will notice pretty quickly that unlike many other prepositions, it can trigger not only one case, but 2 cases, that being the dative and the accusative. Now, luckily, the explanation for this is pretty straightforward. You just need to be aware of it. Now, of course, in order for this to work, you first need to know how to decline nouns, but that's not what we're here to do. That's a different video. So, in order to use in properly, you need to know how to form the dative and the accusative of nouns. So I'm going to assume that you do know that. When you have your case knowledge lined up, the main difference in when to use the dative or the accusative with in is based on whether you are talking about a location or a direction. In other words, the dative in is like the English in, while the accusative in is like the English into. At least in most cases. Of course, there are some exceptions where this might overlap, but that's the general rule that's pretty reliable as far as English-German conversion goes. Let's look at a few examples, because that usually makes things way easier. Ich gehe in mein Zimmer. I go into my room. So we need accusative because it's a direction. I go into the room. However, if I'm already in the room, I could say, Ich gehe in meinem Zimmer umher. I'm walking in my room, I'm walking around my room, something like that. So I'm in a place and I'm walking around there, so dative. Contrast, ich gehe in mein Zimmer, ich gehe in meinem Zimmer umher herum. Du setzt dich in ein Auto. This doesn't really work in English, but basically the translation would be you're sitting down into, so you are getting into a car. Versus, du sitzt in einem Auto. You're sitting in a car. So, du sitzt in einem Auto, place, in the car. Du setzt dich in ein Auto, Akkusativ, direction, into the car. Will in das Haus gehen. He wants to go into the house. Direction, from outside, inside, into, in das Haus, Akkusativ. Will im or in dem Haus bleiben. Will im Haus bleiben. He wants to stay in the house. So, place. He's already in the house. Im or in dem. Im is just a contraction of in and dem. Im Haus, dativ, place. Will im Haus bleiben. Sie läuft in den Park. She's walking into the park. Direction, Akkusativ. Sie läuft in den Park. Sie läuft im Park. She's walking or running in the park. She's already in the park and now she's moving within it. Maybe she's, I don't know, going for a run, jogging. Sie läuft im Park. Wir stellen uns ins Wasser. We're stepping into the water. we're planning on standing there, but for now we have to get there, so it's direction, which means Akkusativ. Wir stellen uns in das, ins Wasser. As opposed to wir stehen im Wasser, we're standing in the water, which is basically the aftermath of us stepping into the water. So wir stellen uns ins Wasser, Akkusativ, and then wir stehen im Wasser. Im Wasser, Dativ. In dem Wasser. Wir stehen im Wasser. Das war eine schlechte Idee. Ihr springt in die Hüpfburg. You're going into the jumping castle. Is that what you call it? Jump forward, jump. What's a Hüpfburg in English? Jump castle. I feel like I know this. Bouncy castle. I don't need to look it up. Bouncy castle. So you're jumping into the bouncy castle. You're so excited, you're jumping into it. So it's a direction, so you need Akkusativ. Ihr springt in die Hüpfburg. You're jumping into the bouncy castle. And then when you're inside it, you're in a place, you need Dativ, so ihr springt in der Hüpfburg. So, female, so it's not im, it's in der. Ihr springt in der Hüpfburg. Because you're in a place. I don't know why I'm getting so excited about this example, but hey, bouncy castles. And finally, sie fliegen in die Luft. They're flying up into the air. Sie fliegen in die Luft. And then when they're up there, whoever they are, sie fliegen in der Luft. So Akkusativ, sie fliegen in die Luft, direction. And then Dativ, sie fliegen in der Luft, place. Now I imagine that understanding this part isn't really the hard thing for English speakers because, like I said, the comparison with in and into is pretty straightforward most of the time, so I imagine that's pretty easy. The more tricky part, of course, is knowing the right forms of the nouns that you are using and of the articles, and of course knowing what article goes with what noun. I made a video at some point very early on where I helped you with figuring out the gender as much as is possible because there are some endings that can help you with gendering, so if you haven't seen that, you can check that out here. Now besides that, what I want to quickly address is a special case that might kind of trip you up or make you think the first time you encountered it, and that's the case of indirect plurals. So just as a reminder, we have direct singular, so direct single forms, which the articles for those are der, die, das. Then we have indirect singulars, for which the articles are ein, eine, ein. Then we have direct plurals, for which the article is die. And then we have indirect plurals, for which there is no article. So, as a direct singular, we could have die Tasche, the bag. The indirect singular would be eine Tasche. The direct plural would be die Taschen. And the indirect plural would simply be Taschen. Now, when we use in with this last group, it really doesn't matter whether it's dative or accusative because both of those forms will look the same. Of course, technically you still have to differentiate between dative and accusative, but the effect is nothing changes because the noun is the same in both cases and there is no article that you have to adjust. So, just as a contrast, if you use the direct plural, then if it's directional, you have to use die Taschen, and if it's in a place, you have to use den Taschen. If I'm putting something into the bags, then I have to say, ich lege etwas in die Taschen. And if I want to say that something is already in the bags, then I have to say, etwas liegt in den Taschen. But if we take out the direct part and just talk about bags, not the bags, just bags, then it doesn't matter whether I say, ich lege es in Taschen or es liegt in Taschen. In both cases, Taschen is the same word and you don't need an article that changes. This is a relief, of course, when making up text or even when reading it, actually. But just as a general note, just keep in mind the whole place versus direction idea. This is also true for metaphorical use, by the way. So if you keep something in mind, then technically it's in a place, right? It's in your mind, or as we say in German, in your head. So here you would say, ich habe das im Kopf. I have that in my head. And because it's a place, you use Dativ. Im Kopf, in dem Kopf. And also you don't have to actually go or be in a place as a whole person either to do this. You could also have something in der Hand, so place in your hand. Or you could put something in die Hand, so Akkusativ, because direction, that's where you're putting it. So, ich habe es in der Hand. and ich nehme es in die Hand. And the same is true for usage with time, which usually kind of correlates with place, right? So, wir sehen in die Zukunft uses Akkusativ because directional, we're looking into the future. Again, in and into. So, wir sehen in die Zukunft is Akkusativ. To contrast, there is the expression in Zukunft, which is Dativ because it means in the future. But we leave out the article here because it's a set phrase that just happens to work like that. And it means in the future in the sense of going forward or from now on or if this comes up again. So, in Zukunft machen wir das anders. We'll do that differently from now on. An example with the article would be in der Zukunft machen wir das anders, which sounds like a person who just time traveled from the future came here and sees you eating with a knife and fork and points at it and says, in der Zukunft machen wir das anders. We do that differently in the future. So the difference is in Zukunft, which is technically a place. So it technically uses Dativ. In Zukunft is an expression that says vaguely the next time this comes up again, this and this, while in der Zukunft is actually talking about the far off, in the future sense. And that's it for today. Let me know in the comments, though, if you think you found an exception to this in some sort of way, like if something ever tripped you up before. Because what would German be without its heaping mound of exceptions? As always, I want to quickly point you to my Patreon, which is what all of these lovely names are coming from. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Patreon by now. If you aren't, Patreon is a way to support DFE financially, and no matter what amount you pledge per video, you will show up on this list as a little thank you from me to you. If you pledge a little bit more, you can actually get access to my grammar scripts, including this one, if you want to review lessons after you've seen them on YouTube, or even independently from them if you don't want to hear me quacking on about them. So, which is hurtful. But anyway, if you want to support me on Patreon, here's the link. It's also in the description. Thank you very much. Now let's give you a random word of the week, which is schunkeln. Now, there isn't really a very good translation for this in English. I think the closest would be to sway or to sway to the music. But basically, it's this movement, and you usually do it in groups, and you do it to a certain kind of music. It's usually something with a very simple and recognizable rhythm. And people like to do it especially when they're drunk. So this is a movement that goes on a lot in the big tents at the Oktoberfest. Schunkeln. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.